So the question was, should we be afraid of AI? We're frozen.
What a great pause.
Hi, I'm Ole Molvig.
And I'm Jenny Davis.
And we will be answering your questions about AI. The rest of this we should do in unison. Yeah. we can possibly sync this.
I study AI as a sociological objective analysis, which means I'm interested in the social forces and factors that get baked into AI systems, like the data that gets built into training models and how that reflects our society and the patterns within, and also the social effects of that technology.
And I approach the study of AI from probably two major points of view. One of them is coming from the work as an historian of science. I also spend a lot of time here on campus as for better term, a kind of a creative technologist.
Hey, my name is Daniel, and my question for you is, how do you think the usage of AI will hinder the way students are able to think critically in the next couple of years?
I think one of the real challenges that students are having right now is they're being told really contradictory things around AI, right? One of them is it's cheating. It's you're cheating yourself. You're harming your education. You might get into trouble with the honor council. And the other one, when you read anything in the paper around job employment, is you need to learn this stuff as fast as possible. You need to use this all the time. It's the thing that's either going to replace you or make you hireable, right? It's both of those things at the same time. And those are some pretty conflicting messages. I think it's really important for both students and for faculty and departments and administrators to think about, when do we need to move from this type of activity or this type of class is really focused on developing the mental muscles of the students, and when do they also need to start practicing deploying those talents and muscles in a way that is not just about building for themselves. So the answer to that is, don't use AI to replace the effort that you're doing, but use it when relevant and when appropriate to augment what you're capable of doing.
I'm Ollie Tuff. I'm wondering, what's the current energy deficit that the U.S. is facing right now, and what do you predict will happen with the amount of energy being built in the U.S., what type of energy it'll be, and how that'll affect residential energy prices in the coming years?
Okay, so the question here is about energy prices in particular, but that's also wrapped up in environmental consequences of AI. So I think one thing we have to keep in mind is that we often think of AI as something that operates in a cloud, but that cloud depends on a robust physical infrastructure in the form of data centers. We're talking about college campus-sized data centers that requires often much more energy than sort of the city in which they're populated. They also require clean, potable water to cool the servers inside. So there's this huge environmental cost and financial cost to cloud-based computing, which actually, ironically, is quite physical. When we're asking about the future of AI, we, yes, need to pay attention to the technical elements of that, but also the political ones. And those questions, to some degree, belong to us as people who research it, study it, learn about it, but I think primarily belong to the people who will live with it.
Okay, hello, my name is Sydney Brown. What parts about AI do you think will be the hardest to regulate from a government and policy perspective that we're overlooking, that might become a really prominent issue in the future?
One of the reasons why I think we're at such an interesting moment from a technical history of science, kind of history of technology point of view, is we are at the tail end of kind of the Web 2.0 social media phase, where 20 years ago we had a similar rush of enthusiasm around new technologies. Now we've been with it long enough that we are spending just as much, if not more time, thinking about the slow, long-term effects that were maybe not intended and in many ways quite damaging. And the question is, do we take that knowledge that we have learned about the unintended consequences of rapid technological at-scale digital development like social media and decide, is this AI so categorically different that we shouldn't take those lessons, or should we be concerned about what those kind of negative externalities are?
As sort of the social media bubble expanded, there were regulatory bodies who didn't quite understand the technology behind it. And so they leaned quite heavily on corporate actors to tell them how they ought to regulate, right?
Yep.
And I think we're seeing the same thing where we see members of at least the US Congress, but also of global bodies heavily directly dependent on figures like sort of big tech AI developers who say these are the factors that are relevant, but of course that's in a very particular political economic interest for those developers, rather than necessarily how representatives would conceive of regulatory structures that benefit the society writ large.
Hi, my name's Soren. Obviously, we're having a lot of issues with like AI plagiarism in art, and I think artists are really frustrated with the fact that this free program can replicate what they're doing without getting paid by taking from their art. What kind of legal solutions could we possibly have for that issue?
I can start with that. That's a really good question. And actually, there's been some legal recourse already when we think about art expansively. So in Tennessee, for example, there's the Elvis Act, which is a protection against image and likeness for musical artists, and in particular vocal artists. So the Writers and Actors Union in Hollywood have mobilized and gained protections for both actors and also technicians and those in the writer's room. In terms of visual artists, there's been so far less success, but I think that's because there's less of a unified organizing force.
I think the question that Soren asked that really hit with me is, I think he's asking as much about what do you do about the training data? What do you do about the fact that this has already happened, these models already exist, and those that added the material to them unwittingly, or in some cases wittingly, have very little recourse to kind of grab things back. And honestly, I don't have a lot of hope that that's going to be a good solution to that problem. So we probably do need to think about what is the next step facing forward. But it is, I imagine, inconceivably frustrating. But it is the case that there's a lot of value still in that artistic eye, the artistic decision making, the decision, and that I don't see going away in the short term, and probably I hope never.
Hi, my name is Sam. My question is, should we as everyday citizens be afraid of AI? And if yes is the answer, then what are some tangible ways that we can make change in our everyday lives?
So the question was, should we be afraid of AI? We're frozen.
What a great pause.
There are lots of discussions around AI fear, all the way to it will be a superhuman intelligence that will wipe out humanity. This is not one of the areas that I have a lot of concern. So my concerns would be kind of twofold. One of them is, what does the immediate economic landscape look like if we're going to have an automation shock to society? But probably the one I'm most concerned, I don't think I would use the word fear, concerned about is not what can AI do, but what do people decide to do with AI. We are not prepared for the cybersecurity problems that AI is going to bring about. We are just not prepared for bad actors with skill deploying these at scale.
So the idea of artificial general intelligence is there's going to be an all-powerful, omnipotent AI that creates an existential risk for humans and overtakes us all, right? An interesting thing about that narrative is that it stems primarily from the people who are making the AI. These sort of big AI companies, these big developers have said, we think it's a problem, we think this is a necessary problem, give us the money to make that problem, but don't worry, we'll put guardrails around it. And I completely agree that those are not where our concern should primarily lie. I think a better frame is maybe critical mindfulness. What should we be critically mindful about when we're deploying these AI to create opportunity structures, to integrate into our creative endeavors, to integrate into our classrooms and our relationships, et cetera, and a critical mindfulness about the way AI is used in context, I think would be sort of the most productive way forward. And part of that is actively sort of rejecting or resisting or kind of putting to the side those larger existential hype-fueled fears. So from a really practical perspective, I think we should take those claims with caution and learn the base skill anyway. The ability to think critically, connect socially and emotionally, problem solve creatively will be valuable as a person and in any economy of the future, whatever that may look like.
Agreed.